A clock tower stops at 247, has been stopped for 58 years, 3 miles outside a small Vermont town behind a stand of pines so thick the road forgets there is anything beyond them. A four-story building of dark red brick stands in a field of overgrown maples. 18,000 square feet. Italianate. Forgotten. Inside the foyer, black and white marble cracked down the middle. A grand staircase, a carved newel post worn smooth at the curve, and on a mahogany desk beneath a wooden plaque whose last word has been rubbed away, a leather book sits closed. Thousands of girls' names, 81 years, closed in 1968, untouched since. In a town 3 miles down the road, a 20-year-old girl is standing at a graveside. She is wearing her mother's coat. She does not know yet about the building. She is about to find a key. Junie Fenimore was 20 years old when she walked into a county courthouse with $700 in her pocket and a brass key around her neck. By the end of the morning, she owned a building. $800. 18,000 square feet. A building the whole town had forgotten was even there. She did not know yet what was inside. Her grandmother had known. Her grandmother had spent 60 years not being able to say. This is the story of what was inside. The grave was small. Smaller than Junie expected. Just a rectangle of brown earth in the corner of Cherrybrook Cemetery. The kind of plot the town reserved for people who couldn't afford anything bigger. Junie Fenimore stood at the edge, 20 years old, hands buried deep in the pockets of a black coat that used to belong to her mother. The coat was 2 sizes too big and smelled like cedar and old lavender. The pastor said something about peace, about rest, about a life well lived. Junie didn't hear most of it. She was looking at the headstone instead. Theodora May Fenimore, 1947 to 2026. Loved. That was all. One word. Loved. Her grandmother had been very specific about the headstone. No verses, no flowers carved into the granite. Just that one word. Because Teddy didn't waste anything. Not money, not words, not love. The wind moved through the maples and the leaves came down in slow yellow spirals. 8 people at the graveside. That was it. 8. The pastor, the funeral director, Mrs. Opal Kettleridge from the library where Junie worked, 2 old women Junie didn't recognize, a man in a brown coat who kept his hat in his hands, and her uncle. Her Uncle Harlan stood across the grave with his arms crossed. He hadn't looked at Junie once during the whole service, hadn't hugged her, hadn't spoken to her. He was Teddy's son, Junie's only living relative besides a few distant cousins she'd never met. And he hated her. She didn't know exactly why, hadn't ever known. He'd hated her mother first, then her. Some old grudge that had calcified over decades into something that didn't even need a reason anymore. The pastor finished. People started to drift away. Mrs. Kettleridge squeezed Junie's elbow on her way past and whispered something kind that Junie couldn't quite hear over the ringing in her ears. Then it was just her, and the grave, and her uncle. Harlan walked around the headstone and stopped 6 feet from her, close enough to speak, far enough that nobody watching from the parking lot would mistake it for tenderness. "You got till Sunday." Junie blinked. "What?" "To clear out. Mother's house goes on the market Monday. Uncle Harlan Sunday." He didn't wait for a response, just turned and walked across the wet grass to his Buick. The door slammed, the engine started, and then he was gone. Junie stood at the grave a long time after that, until the cemetery workers came with shovels and looked at her with that polite, patient look that meant, "Miss, we need to start filling this in." She walked back to her grandmother's house alone. The house was on Plum Street, 2 bedrooms, yellow siding, a porch that sagged on one side. Teddy had owned it free and clear since 1989. Junie had moved in when she was 8. After her mother died, after the social worker showed up and her Uncle Harlan said very loudly that he didn't want the kid, Teddy had taken her in without a word. Just opened the door, made up the small bedroom upstairs with sheets that smelled like the cedar chest, set a plate of macaroni in front of her, and said, "We'll figure it out, kitten." That was the only thing Teddy ever called her. Kitten. The house was quiet now. Quiet in a way houses get when somebody important has just left them. Junie hung up the coat, sat down at the kitchen table. The dishes from yesterday were still in the sink. A coffee cup with a lipstick mark on the rim. Teddy's lipstick. Coral. The same shade for 50 years. Junie put her head down on the table and didn't cry. She couldn't. The tears were stuck somewhere behind her sternum, and they wouldn't come up. She slept on the kitchen table for 40 minutes, woke with a crease across her cheek and her neck stiff. The light through the window had shifted to late afternoon gold, and on the counter where Teddy had put it 3 weeks ago before the stroke was a small wooden box. Junie had been avoiding the box. The lawyer who read the will had pointed at it. "Your grandmother said this was for you. She said you'd know when to open it." Junie had brought it home, set it on the counter, and not touched it. Until now. She picked it up. It was the size of a paperback book. Pine, hinged with brass. Teddy had made it herself in the woodshop at the senior center back when her hands still worked. Junie opened the lid. Inside were 3 things. A roll of 20s held together with a rubber band. She counted later. $700 exactly. A piece of folded paper. And a key. The key stopped her breath. It was brass, heavy, 3 inches long, the kind of key that hadn't been made in 100 years. The handle was shaped like a little flower, a marigold maybe, petals worn smooth by somebody's thumb. Junie set the key on the table and picked up the paper. Teddy's handwriting. Shaky. Done in pencil. Kitten. If you are reading this, then I am gone. I am sorry I never told you about the place. I was a coward. I thought I had more time. Buy it back if you can. It belongs to us. The key is the key. I love you more than I ever found words for. Grandma Junie read it 3 times. Buy what back? What place? The key is the key. She turned the brass key over in her palm, held it up to the light. There was something engraved on the shaft. Tiny letters. She had to take the paper off the lampshade and put on her reading glasses to see them. MH 1887. MH. She had no idea what MH meant. She put everything back in the box, closed the lid, took the box upstairs to her bedroom, set it on the nightstand, and lay down on the bed in her funeral clothes and stared at the ceiling until it got dark. She had until Sunday. Today was Tuesday. She had 4 days to figure out where she was going to live, 4 days to find a place for Teddy's things, 4 days to be 20 years old and alone in a town of 5,000 people where her own uncle wouldn't lend her a couch. 4 days. The next morning, Junie went to work. The Cherry Brook Public Library opened at 9. She got there at 1:45. Mrs. Opal Kettleridge was already inside making coffee. Opal was 75 and had been a librarian since before Junie was born, and had hair the color of tarnished silver pulled back in a braid that hung to her waist. Opal looked up when the bell over the door rang. "You shouldn't be here today, child." "I need to work." "Junie." "Please, Opal, I need to." Opal looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right then. Cart of returns by the desk needs shelving." Junie shelved books for 2 hours. Romance in the romance section. Mysteries in the mystery section. A stack of cookbooks back in 6'4", 1.5. And on the 3rd trip past the front desk, she saw the newspaper. The Cherry Brook Gazette, Wednesday edition, folded open to page 7. Opal must have been reading it before opening. The page was the classifieds. And there in the bottom corner in a small black box with a county seal was the listing. County foreclosure auction. Thursday 10 a.m., Ridge County Courthouse. Lot 14. Former Marigold Hall. 4 Oak Ridge Road. Residential historic. 18,000 square feet. 5 acres. Condition as is. All liens cleared. Minimum bid $5. Marigold Hall, MH. Junie went still, standing in the aisle between reference and local history, a book on her hip, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. She read it again, and again, and a fourth time. Marigold Hall. She had no idea what Marigold Hall was. She'd lived in Cherry Brook for 12 years, and she had never heard of it, never seen it, never heard Teddy mention it. Not once. But the key in the box had a marigold on the handle, and the engraving said MH 1887, and Teddy's note said, "Buy it back." Junie set the book on the cart, walked to the front desk. Opal was on the phone with a patron about an overdue audiobook. "Opal, just a moment, dear." "Opal." Opal looked up, saw Junie's face, said into the phone, "I'll have to call you back, Mrs. Garber," and hung up. "What is it?" Junie held out the newspaper, pointed at the listing. "What is Marigold Hall?" Opal's face changed. It changed in a way Junie had never seen on Opal's face. It went very still. Not sad exactly, not surprised. Something older than either of those things. Opal took the newspaper, read the listing, looked up at Junie, then back at the listing. "Where did you find this?" "Just now. Here. It's in the paper." "No, I mean, why are you looking at it?" Junie didn't have a good answer, so she said the only thing she could think of. "My grandmother left me a key with a marigold on it. She said to buy it back." Opal sat down slowly in the swivel chair behind the desk. She set the paper on the blotter, smoothed it with both hands. The little silver ring on her right pinky finger caught the light. "Oh, Teddy." "Opal, what is Marigold Hall?" "Sit down, child." "I don't want to sit down." "Sit down." Junie sat down. Opal looked at her for a long time. The library was very quiet. The clock on the wall ticked. Marigold Hall was an orphanage. An orphanage. For girls, built in 1887, closed in 1968, big Italianate building out on Oak Ridge Road. You know the road that goes up past the apple farm? You go 3 miles past Wilbur's place, and there's a long drive on the left. Behind a stand of pines. Most people don't even know it's there anymore. Why have I never heard of it? Because nobody talks about it, kitten. Junie flinched. Opal never called her kitten. Only Teddy had called her kitten. Opal's eyes filled up. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "Why doesn't anybody talk about it?" "Because," Opal took a breath, "because most of the girls who lived there never told anyone they had lived there. They left when they aged out, 18, and they walked away and they did not look back." "Why?" "Because of the shame." "What shame?" Opal looked at her with the careful expression of a woman who had decided to tell the truth. In those years, a girl in an orphanage was a girl whose mother had not been able to keep her, or had not wanted to, or had been forced not to. There were 1,000 reasons, and none of them were the girl's fault, but the world treated her like they were. Opal. Yes. Was my grandmother. Opal nodded once. Teddy was at Marigold Hall from 1955 to 1965. She came in at 8 years old. She left at 18. She never told a soul, not even her husband, not even your mother. I only knew because I was at Cherry Brook High when she came out, and we ended up sitting next to each other in homeroom. And one night at a sleepover, she got drunk on her mother's cooking sherry and told me. And then in the morning, she made me swear I would never repeat it. Junie couldn't speak. Her grandmother, Teddy, the woman who had raised her, who had taught her how to make biscuits and how to braid her hair and how to drive a stick shift on the back roads behind Wilbur's farm. Teddy had been an orphan for 10 years in a building 3 miles outside of town, and nobody had ever told her. Why is it for sale? Opal sighed. The county took it for back taxes a year ago. The estate of the last owner, She was a recluse. She died and there were no heirs, and the taxes hadn't been paid in 20 years. They tried to sell it last spring. Nobody bid. Nobody wants it. Building's a wreck. Roof's half gone. Foundations cracked. They keep dropping the minimum bid trying to unload it before they have to demolish it. $5. $5. They'd take 5 cents at this point. Junie sat very still. She thought about the key in the wooden box upstairs in her bedroom. She thought about her grandmother carving a wooden box at the senior center with hands that shook from the medication. She thought about Teddy on her deathbed. The way she had grabbed Junie's wrist 3 days before the end and said, "Kitten, there's something I should have told you," and then the morphine had taken her again before she could finish. This was what she should have told her. Opal. Yes. How does the auction work? Oh, child, no. How does it work? Junie, listen to me. You are 20 years old. You have $700 and a high school diploma, and your uncle is throwing you out of your grandmother's house on Sunday. You cannot buy an 18,000 square foot wreck of a building that nobody else wants for a reason. How does it work? Opal looked at her hard, and then she sighed. The sigh of a woman who had known Theodora Fenimore for 60 years and recognized that look on the face of her granddaughter. You show up at the courthouse at 9:45. You go to the clerk's window. You ask for a bidder's paddle. You give them your driver's license and a deposit of $100 cash. They give you a paddle with a number. You go sit in the auction room. When they call lot 14, you raise the paddle. And then if nobody bids against you, you own a building. Junie nodded, stood up, walked back to the cart of returns, picked up the next book, and went on shelving. The auction was Thursday morning. Junie didn't sleep Wednesday night. She sat on the bed in her funeral clothes, which she had not yet changed out of, with the wooden box open on her lap, holding the key. She thought about Teddy, about being 8 years old and being put into a building with 30 other girls and having to learn how to live there and nobody knowing. She thought about her own mother, who had grown up never knowing her mother had been an orphan, who had died at 38 of a stroke, 6 years younger than Teddy, 2 strokes, 1 family. The doctor said it was genetic. She thought about her father, who had left when she was 4, who she barely remembered, who lived somewhere in Arizona now with a new family. She thought about being alone, really alone, not lonely alone. Junie had been lonely alone her whole life. This was the other thing, the thing where you look around a room and there is nobody. There is just the chair and the lamp and the small wooden box and the key that fits a lock you have never seen. She gripped the key. At 3 in the morning, she got up, walked downstairs, walked into Teddy's room. The room she had not entered since the morning she had found Teddy in the bed and called the ambulance, and the EMTs had shaken their heads kindly and explained about the second stroke. She stood in the doorway. The bed was made, the way Teddy had taught her to make a bed. Hospital corners, quilt folded to the foot, 2 pillows propped against the headboard. There was a box on top of the dresser. Junie hadn't noticed it before, or she had noticed it and hadn't registered it. It was a cardboard box, banker's box size, tied with a green ribbon. She crossed the room, lifted the lid. Inside were books, old textbooks. Their spines were broken. Their pages were yellow. Sticky notes covered the edges in faded colors. Architectural conservation principles and practice. The Field Guide to American Houses. Lime mortar and plaster restoration. Wood joinery for historic preservation. 12 books. Junie picked up the top one. On the inside cover in handwriting that wasn't Teddy's was a name. Margaret Fenimore, 1995. Her mother's books. From college. Her mother had studied architectural conservation at the University of Vermont, had graduated with honors in 2002, had then gotten pregnant with Junie and never practiced, had worked at the post office until the stroke, had never spoken about her degree. Junie sat down on the floor of her grandmother's bedroom holding her mother's textbook. She knew these books. She knew them by heart. Because when her mother died when Junie was 8, Junie had spent every afternoon after school for the next 12 years in the library, reading the books on the shelves about architectural preservation, about foundations in lime mortar and slate roofing, about sash window restoration and stained glass repair, about horsehair plaster and rosehead nails. She had never told anybody. She had been afraid to. 8-year-old girls who like buildings get called weird. 12-year-old girls who can identify a load-bearing wall get called weird. 20-year-old girls who can tell the difference between an Italianate and a Second Empire facade by looking at the eave brackets get called weird. So Junie had kept it to herself. Read the books in the back corner of the library, hidden them inside the covers of romance novels when Opal came by, sketched architectural details on the back pages of her math notebooks at school. She had never told anyone, not even Teddy. She had been so sure Teddy would think she was weird. And here in this box on this dresser, where Teddy had put it, were her mother's books. Teddy had known. Junie sat on the floor and finally the tears came. They came in a flood, hot and silent. She gripped the textbook to her chest and pressed her face into its cracked spine and rocked. And the sound that came out of her was a sound she had not made since she was 8 years old in a hospital hallway. She cried for an hour, maybe 2. The room was dark when she finally stopped. And then she got up, carried the box of books back to her bedroom, set them on the dresser, set the wooden box next to them, set the key on top of the wooden box, and she got into bed and slept. At 9:45 Thursday morning, she walked into the Ridge County Courthouse. She had on jeans, a flannel shirt, hiking boots, her hair pulled back in a braid like Opal's. She had counted out $100 from the $700 Teddy had left her, folded the bills into the front pocket of the flannel. The wooden box was in her backpack. The key was around her neck on a piece of green ribbon Junie had pulled off the banker's box. The courthouse was old, built in 1919, marble floor, brass railings, a smell of furniture polish and burnt coffee. She found the clerk's window, asked for a bidder's paddle. The clerk was a woman about Opal's age with reading glasses on a chain. Lot number 14, ma'am. The clerk looked up, looked Junie over. Honey, yes. You know what's on lot 14? I do. And you understand the as-is and the no warranties and the all liens cleared and the... I do. The clerk looked at her one more time, then took the driver's license, took the $100, wrote down the deposit, handed Junie a wooden paddle with the number 23 painted on it. Auction room is at the end of the hall. Thank you. Honey. Yes. Good luck. Junie nodded and walked down the hall. The auction room was about half full, maybe 25 people, mostly men, mostly contractors and landlords in flannel shirts and work boots, almost identical to what Junie was wearing. There was a man at the front in a navy blue suit. He was about 58, silver hair, the kind of haircut that cost more than Junie's weekly grocery budget. He was talking to 2 other men in suits. All 3 of them had coffee cups from the place on Main Street that charged $7 for a latte. They were laughing. The man in the navy suit looked up as Junie walked in. His eyes caught on her for half a second, slid past. Junie sat in the back row. The auction started. Lots 1 through 13 went fast. A duplex on Cypress Street to a landlord. A storage warehouse on the highway to a contractor. A vacant lot to a developer. The man in the navy suit bought lot 11, a house on Birch Avenue. He paid $40,000 for it. He raised his paddle without even looking at it, like the number didn't matter. Then, lot 14, former Marigold Hall, 4 Oak Ridge Road, residential historic, 18,000 square feet, 5 acres, condition as is. All liens cleared by the county. Minimum bid $5. The auctioneer said this in the same flat board voice he had used for all the other lots. The man in the navy suit raised his paddle, $5 to number 8. Junie's heart stopped. She had not thought. She had not thought somebody else would bid. She had been so focused on getting to the auction and finding the courthouse and counting out her money that she had never once considered that somebody else might want Marigold Hall. The man in the navy suit was smiling. He turned and looked at the other two men beside him and made some little gesture with his hand. See, done, easy. The auctioneer said, "Do I hear 6?" Junie raised her paddle. It went up before she even thought about raising it, like her arm was on a string and somebody else was pulling. $6 to number 23. The room turned. 25 heads. All of them. Turning to look at her. The man in the navy suit turned too. His eyes found her and held. He had not noticed her before. He was noticing her now. He smiled, slowly, the smile of a man who thinks something is amusing. He raised his paddle without looking away from her. $7 to number 8. The auctioneer said this with new interest in his voice. He could feel something happening in the room. Junie's mouth was dry. She had $700. She had brought $700 exactly because that was what Teddy had left her in the box. She had bought $100 of it for the deposit. She had $600 left in her backpack. She had thought that would be more than enough. It was not going to be enough. The man in the navy suit was watching her, waiting. The auctioneer said, "Do I hear 8?" Junie raised her paddle. $8 to number 23. The room was so quiet Junie could hear the auctioneer's pen tapping on his pad. The man in the navy suit raised his paddle. 9. Junie raised hers. 10. He raised his. 11. The auctioneer was looking at them like they were a tennis match. $11. Junie had $11 cash in her pocket. The man in the navy suit was now turned all the way around in his chair to face her. He was still smiling, but the smile had something underneath it now, something hard. He raised his paddle again. $12. Junie's hands started to shake. She had brought $600 cash. She had thought that was a fortune. She had thought she would buy a building for $5 and have $595 left to fix the roof. She raised her paddle. 13. He raised his. 14. 15. 20. The whole room flinched. He had just jumped the bid $5. The auctioneer said, $20 to number 8. Do I hear 21? Junie raised her paddle. 21. 50, the man said, without raising the paddle. Just said it. The auctioneer hesitated, looked at him. The man in the navy suit nodded once. The auctioneer said, $50 to number 8. Junie's hand was shaking. She didn't have any plan. She didn't know what this man's limit was. She didn't know if he was going to bid $500 or $50,000. She knew only that he had bought a house this morning for $40,000 without blinking, and that he was looking at her like he had decided to teach her a lesson. She raised the paddle. 51. He laughed out loud in the auction room. 100, he said. The other two men in suits laughed too, like it was a great joke, like the cheap seats were getting uppity and they were going to have to be shown. The auctioneer said $100 to number 8. Junie counted in her head. She had $599 left in her backpack, plus the $100 deposit she had already given. That was $699. Then the 11 in her pocket, $710 total. She raised the paddle. 101. 500, the man said. The room gasped. The auctioneer said, $500 to number 8. Junie thought about her grandmother. She thought about Teddy at 8 years old getting on a train alone with a suitcase. She thought about Teddy in this same town for 60 years carrying a secret nobody ever asked her about. She thought about the box on the counter with $700 and a brass key. Buy it back if you can. It belongs to us. She raised the paddle. 700. It was her whole life. Every dollar she had in the world. The man in the navy suit looked at her for a long moment. He had stopped smiling. She watched him do the math. She watched him think about it. She could see him weighing it. He had pegged her at 5, maybe 10. He had not pegged her at 700. He raised his paddle slowly. 701. The room exhaled. Junie's stomach dropped through the floor. She had nothing. She had bid $700 and lost. She had bid everything she had and lost. She did not have 702. She did not have 701. She did not have one more dollar. She stared at the man in the navy suit. He stared back, smiling again now. He had won. He had made his point. The cheap seats had been put in their place. The auctioneer said, 701 to number 8. Do I hear 702? Junie's mouth was open. She was trying to speak. She couldn't. And then she heard a voice behind her, a voice she knew. $800. Junie turned. In the second to last row of the auction room, sitting alone, in a green coat, with her tarnished silver braid hanging down her back, Mrs. Opal Kettleridge, holding a paddle in her right hand. A paddle she must have gotten that morning. While Junie was busy not looking at anything but the front of the room, Opal did not look at Junie. She was looking at the man in the navy suit. The man in the navy suit was looking at Opal. He knew her. You could see it on his face. Of course he knew her. Cherrybrook had 5,000 people. Everyone knew everyone. Opal had been the librarian for 50 years. She had handed this man his first library card when he was probably 8 years old. He stared at her. She stared back. The auctioneer said $800 to number. He checked the paddle, 31. Do I hear 801? The man in the navy suit did not raise his paddle. He just kept looking at Opal. His face was doing something complicated. Junie could see the math going on behind his eyes. He was thinking about how a story like this would play. He was thinking about Mrs. Kettleridge, the elderly librarian, publicly bidding against him for a wreck of a building she could not possibly want. He was thinking about who she would tell. He was thinking about church on Sunday and the diner on Main Street in the Cherrybrook Gazette. He set his paddle down on the chair next to him. The auctioneer said, going once, going twice, sold, lot 14, $800 to number 31. The gavel came down. Junie sat in her chair and could not feel her own hands. People were filing out of the auction room. Junie was still in her chair. She had not moved. The man in the navy suit had walked out the door without looking at her, his 2 friends with him. Opal slid into the seat beside her. Breathe, child. Opal. Breathe in, breathe out, like that. Good. Opal, you just... I know what I just did. $800? I know. Opal, you can't. Junie. Opal reached over and took her hand. I was supposed to live in Marigold Hall in 1958. My mother had me almost dropped off there. She changed her mind on the way. She turned the car around in the parking lot. Junie stared at her. My mother was the one who turned the car around. Teddy's mother was the one who didn't. And so I grew up in my own house. And Teddy grew up in that house. And that has been a fact between us for 60 years. Opal's eyes were wet. I have $800 I have been saving for 50 years that I never had a good use for. Now I do. I can't. Yes, you can. Opal. Yes, you can. You take it. You take the deed. And on a Saturday, 5 years from now, when you have figured out what you are doing with that building, you take me out to lunch at the diner on Main Street, and you buy me a tuna melt, and we are square. Junie could not breathe. Opal stood up. Now come on, kitten. We have to go pay for a building. She paid Opal back in installments over the next year, $20 at a time, from her library paychecks. Opal accepted each payment by saying, fine, fine, and putting the bills in the cookie jar above the refrigerator. But that was later. Right then, in the courthouse hallway, Junie stood at the clerk's window. The clerk was looking at her with an expression that was no longer pity. It was something closer to respect. The clerk slid the deed across the marble counter. Junie Mae Fenimore, 4 Oak Ridge Road, Cherrybrook, Vermont. Purchase price $800 in 0 cents. Junie picked it up. The paper was heavier than she expected. She turned and walked back down the hallway, out the heavy oak doors, down the courthouse steps. Opal was waiting on the sidewalk in her green coat. "You want to see it now?" "I want to see it now." They drove out in Opal's old Toyota, past Main Street, past the diner, past the gas station, up the road that climbed past the apple farm, past Wilbur's place. 3 miles. Then a long driveway on the left behind a stand of pines so dense you couldn't see anything through them. They turned in. The driveway was long, curving, asphalt cracked and weeds growing up through every crack. They drove slowly. The pines on either side were 30 feet tall. The branches met overhead and made a green tunnel. And then the pines ended, and the building came into view. Junie said nothing. She could not. Marigold Hall was enormous. It was a 4-story building of dark red brick with limestone trim. Italianate, built in 1887. A tall central tower rose from the front facade with a clock face on each of its 4 sides. The clock hands had stopped at 2:47. A wide porch ran across the front with limestone columns. The roof was slate. Half the slates were gone. The other half were green with lichen. Tall windows ran in pairs down the facade, 24 of them on the front alone. Most still had glass. Some had plywood. Behind the main building, Junie could see the roof lines of other structures. A chapel, maybe. A bell tower. A long, low building that might have been a refectory. The grounds were 5 acres. Overgrown. Maples and oaks 50 years old growing wild where there used to be lawn. A walled garden visible on the side with the wall partially collapsed. Marigold Hall was the largest building Junie had ever seen up close in her life. And as of 15 minutes ago, it belonged to her. Opal stopped the car at the foot of the porch steps. The two of them sat in the front seats and looked at it. "My God," Junie said. "Yes." "Opal." "Yes." "What have I done?" "Honey." Opal turned to her. Her face was tired and proud. "You went and bought back your grandmother's childhood." Junie reached up to her neck, untied the green ribbon. The brass key fell into her palm. The key was the key. She got out of the car, walked up the cracked porch steps. The double front doors were oak, 12 feet tall. The keyhole was brass, tarnished, big. She put the key in. It turned. The doors swung open, and Junie Fenimore, 20 years old, alone in the world except for one elderly librarian standing on the gravel behind her, walked into the place her grandmother had been afraid to tell her about. The smell hit her first. Dust, old wood, something like dried herbs, something underneath like rose water. And underneath that, the smell of a building that had been closed up for 58 years. Junie stood in the foyer and looked. The floor was marble, black and white, Italian, cracked in places, buckled where water had come through the ceiling above. A grand staircase curved up to the second floor. The banister was carved walnut. The newel post at the bottom was a column of dark wood that ended in a finial shaped like a marigold. The ceiling overhead was 20 feet, pressed tin, painted cream, most of the paint flaking. To the left, through a wide doorway, Junie could see a parlor, a long room with 3 fireplaces. The wallpaper was sun-faded green silk damask, hanging in tatters in places. To the right was another parlor, or maybe a music room. She could see the back of a grand piano standing under a dust cloth. The cloth was filthy. Straight ahead at the back of the foyer was a desk, mahogany, built in. Behind it on the wall was a row of brass hooks. Above the hooks was a wooden plaque, carved letters. Marigold Hall, established 1887, for girls without. The last word was worn smooth. You couldn't read it. Junie walked to the desk. There was a thick book on it, leather-bound, furred with dust. She wiped the dust off with the side of her hand. Register of Residence. She opened it. The first page was dated 1887. Names in copper-plate handwriting. Margaret Tilden, Lucy Hawes, Beatrice Mott. 12 names, 8 to 14 years old, all listed as orphans or wards of the county. Junie turned pages. The handwriting changed as the matron changed. The pages stained. The names accumulated. Hundreds of names, then thousands. She turned to the back of the book. The page was on the right side of the spread. 8 names listed for that year. The names were in blue ballpoint pen. The handwriting was tidy and round. Junie's eyes ran down the list. Mary Costigan, 9. Boston. Bernice Otley, 12. Hartford. Theodora May Fenimore, 8. Boston. Junie stopped breathing. Theodora May Fenimore, her grandmother. In the register, age 8, from Boston. There was a column for Guardian. In the column next to Teddy's name, somebody had written Sandra Fenimore, mother, will not be visiting. Junie stared at the page. She felt Opal come up behind her, felt her stand close, felt her not say anything. After a long time, Junie turned the page. Teddy's name kept appearing. In 1956, in the list of girls assisting in the kitchen. In 1958, in the list of girls promoted to the upper dormitory. In 1961, in the honor roll for the Hall School. In 1963, in the list of girls performing in the spring recital. In 1965, in the list of girls who had aged out and would not be returning for the fall term. 10 years of her grandmother's life. In handwriting Junie had never seen. In a building Junie had not known existed. Junie closed the register, set her palm on the cover. The wood of the desk was warm under her hand, not from the sun, from something else. The way old wood gets warm when it has been loved for a long time and then left alone for too long. "Hi, Grandma," Junie whispered. Opal touched her shoulder. Junie did not turn around. "I'm home." The first week, Junie did not leave the building. She slept in the parlor on a camping mat she dragged in from the trunk of Opal's Toyota. Ate cold sandwiches Opal brought her. Drank coffee from a thermos. Washed her face in the kitchen sink that still ran rust-brown water for 40 seconds before it cleared. She had moved her things out of her grandmother's house on Saturday, one day before her uncle's deadline. 2 boxes of clothes, 3 boxes of books, the wooden box, her mother's textbooks, a photo album, Teddy's coral lipstick still in the bathroom cabinet, which Junie had wrapped in tissue and tucked into her coat pocket like a relic. She had carried everything into Marigold Hall and set it down in the parlor. And then she started with the foyer. Because the foyer was where the deed had been signed, where her grandmother's name had appeared in the register, where she had said, "I'm home to a building that was not yet a home but might become one." She borrowed a wet-dry vacuum from Opal. She borrowed a stack of soft bristle brushes from the Historical Society. She borrowed nothing from her Uncle Harlan because her Uncle Harlan would not have given her a paperclip. She vacuumed the marble, brushed the dust off the carved newel post, climbed the staircase one tread at a time, identified every cracked plaster medallion in the ceiling, cataloged every broken window, sketched the floor plan on the back of a roll of butcher paper Opal had pulled from the back room of the library. She worked 16 hours a day because she had nowhere else to be, because she had no one to tell her to stop, because every time she stopped, she could feel the size of the building pressing down on her shoulders, and the only way to make it stop pressing was to move. On the 8th day, she found the music room. She had cleared the dust cloth off the grand piano. It was a Bosendorfer, Vienna, 1903 by the serial number. The wood was dark walnut. The keys were yellow ivory. 3 of the keys did not move when she pressed them. The middle C did. She played the middle C with one finger. The sound that came out of the piano was the loudest sound Junie had heard in a week. It hung in the air for a long time. Then she sat down on the bench and she cried for 40 minutes. And then she got up and got back to work. The town found out on the 10th day. The Cherry Brook Gazette ran a small article on page 3. Local resident purchases, former orphanage site. 20-year-old library worker says she plans to restore. There was a photograph. The reporter had come out and stood Junie on the cracked porch steps. She had her hair in a braid, dust on her cheek. She was holding the brass key. She looked 12. By noon, the article was on Facebook. By dinner, it had been shared 400 times. By the next morning, the comments under the post were 300 deep. Bless her heart, she has no idea what she's done. Where are this child's parents? That building should have been demolished 30 years ago. Saw her in there yesterday. She's living in the parlor, like a squatter. Somebody should call Child Protective Services. Junie was 20 years old. She was not a child. But on Facebook, the difference between 20 and 12 is the difference between poor thing and poor thing. She read the comments once, on Opal's phone, standing in the foyer with the vacuum cord in her other hand. She read them and she did not say anything. She handed the phone back to Opal and she went back to work. Opal blocked the page on her phone after that. Mayor Barnaby Prescott read the article over breakfast on Tuesday. He read it twice. Then he set the paper down and picked up his cell phone and called the town's building inspector. Get out to Oak Ridge Road today. Sir, that building has been condemned for 30 years. I want a full inspection. I want a list of every violation. I want it on my desk by Friday. Mayor, I don't have the authority to. I am giving you the authority. The Fenimore girl is living in there, without water, without heat, without permits. She is endangering public safety. Go out there today. He hung up. He stared out the window of his kitchen for a long time, down at his lawn, which was the largest lawn in Cherry Brook, with the largest brick colonial sitting in the middle of it. The Oak Ridge property had been a $5 million mountainside resort in his head for 15 years. He had bought the adjacent acreage in 2014. He had drawn up plans in 2018. He had been waiting for the building to come down. A 20-year-old in a flannel shirt had walked into his courthouse and stopped his retirement plan in 7 minutes. He was not going to allow it. The building inspector arrived at Marigold Hall at 4 in the afternoon. Junie was in the foyer on her hands and knees with a soft brush and a bowl of distilled water cleaning a cracked floor tile. She did not hear the truck pull up over the noise of the wet-dry vacuum. She heard the boots on the porch steps. She looked up. A young man in a polo shirt, mid-20s. Clipboard. The town seal on the shirt pocket. Junie Fenimore. Yes. I'm with the building department. I'm here for a code inspection. Junie stood up. She wiped her hands on her jeans. She walked to the foyer desk, to the leather satchel she had bought at the Cherry Brook hardware store with the last of her library paycheck. She pulled out 4 folded permits: foundation stabilization, roof partial replacement, electrical safety inspection, window restoration, all filed at the county office, all approved, all signed. She had filed them on day 3. She handed them to the building inspector. He looked at them, looked at her, looked at them again. Ma'am, they're current. The county building officer signed each one. You can call him. The inspector stood in the foyer holding her permits and looked at the marble floor and looked at the brush and the bowl of distilled water. He looked at the 20-year-old girl in front of him who had filed historic restoration paperwork at the county before he had even known her name. Who sent you? Ma'am, I'm not at liberty to. It was the mayor, wasn't it? He didn't answer. Junie nodded. She took the permits back from him, folded them, returned them to the satchel. Tell him the work is going to code, every nail. He's welcome to come see for himself. The inspector left. Junie went back to the floor tile. The mayor called the inspector at 6. Tell me you found something. Sir, she had permits on file. What? Foundation, roof, electrical, window restoration. All filed January 19th. All approved. Who signed off on those? Marcus Tibbetts at the county office. Sir, she knew what she was doing. She knew exactly what she was doing. The mayor did not respond for a long time. He hung up without saying goodbye. He stood at his kitchen window for a longer time after that. Cyril Hawthorne came on the 14th day. He was 70 years old, tall, walked with a slight limp on the left side, skin the color of polished walnut, hands the size of dinner plates, and a quiet way of standing that suggested he had never in his life raised his voice and had never needed to. He drove a Ford pickup that was older than Junie. He parked at the foot of the porch steps, got out, walked up the steps slowly, stood at the open front door looking in. Junie was on a ladder in the foyer. She was working on the plaster medallion above the door, a 6-foot circle of acanthus leaves and roses, half of it, missing the other half, held in place by what looked like dust and prayer. She heard him at the door and turned on the ladder and almost lost her balance. Easy now, he said. Hello? Junie Fenimore. Yes. I'm Cyril Hawthorne. I'd like to come in if that's all right with you. Of course. He stepped into the foyer, took off his cap, looked up at the medallion she was working on, then around at the rest of the room. The black and white marble, the carved staircase, the wooden plaque above the desk. His face did something Junie could not read. Mr. Hawthorne. Cyril, please. Cyril, have you been here before? Yes. He didn't elaborate. She climbed down the ladder. He stood in the foyer with his cap in his hands. He was looking at the floor where the marble pattern came together in the center. There was a starburst inlay there. 16 points, cream and black. My mother used to clean this floor, he said. Junie went still. She was the cook here from 1949 until they closed it. 19 years. She came up from Tennessee when she was 19 years old. She got the job because the matron in those days didn't care what color you were if you could make a roast chicken that didn't taste like wet cardboard. He looked at the floor a long time. She used to bring me with her on Saturdays. I was a little boy. I'd sit at the kitchen table and shell peas. There was a girl here named Theodora who used to give me a peppermint when nobody was looking. Junie's hands went numb. Sir. Cyril. Cyril. Yes. That girl, Theodora. Yes. Was she? He looked at her then, really looked at her. He saw something in her face. He took a step closer. Was she who child? Theodora May Fenimore. He was silent for a long time. He nodded once. Yes, that was her name. She was my grandmother. Cyril Hawthorne closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were wet. I read the paper, he said. When I read your name, I thought maybe. I just thought maybe. I drove out here today to see if maybe. Cyril? Yes. She raised me. I know she did. The paper said, He stopped, pressed his hand against his mouth. She gave me peppermints, he said. I know she did. I'm 70 years old and I'm standing in this foyer and I just remembered that. A skinny little girl with brown hair giving me peppermints. I know. He took a breath. I came to help. What? I'm a carpenter. Was. 38 years, retired in 2018. I keep my tools sharp. I owe your grandmother and I owe my mother and I owe this building. I'd like to help you fix it, if you'll have me. Junie's throat was so tight she could not speak. She nodded. She nodded, and she nodded, and she could not stop nodding. Cyril Hawthorne walked to the foot of the staircase, set his hand on the carved walnut newel post, the marigold finial. He touched it the way you touch a hand you have not held in a long time. All right then, he said. All right. Where do we start? Sage Donnelly came the next Saturday. He was Cyril's grandson, 22 years old, a senior at the University of Vermont, studying historic preservation. He drove down from Burlington in a Subaru with a kayak on the roof and a tool belt in the back seat. He had his grandfather's quiet in his grandfather's hands. He had hair the color of wheat and a small scar through one eyebrow. He walked into the foyer wearing canvas work pants and a flannel almost identical to Junie's. He took in the building in one slow sweep. Then he looked at Junie. "You're the girl who bought a Bosendorfer for $800. I bought a building. The piano came with it. That is a 1903 Imperial. 3 keys don't work. 3 keys is nothing." He stuck out his hand. "Sage Donnelly. Junie Fenimore. I know who you are." He held her hand a second longer than was strictly necessary. He turned, looked at his grandfather, looked back at Junie. "What are we doing today?" "Plaster," Cyril said. "She's been trying to do the medallion alone for a week." "All right, then." He set down his tool belt, took off his jacket, hung it on a brass hook above the foyer desk, looked at Junie one more time, and smiled. She felt something in her chest do something unfamiliar. She did not have time for that. She turned back to the ladder. The little girl came on the third Saturday. Junie was on the back lawn, such as it was, pulling up the wild blackberry that had grown over the kitchen door for so many years it had bonded with the limestone. She had on canvas gloves, a sun hat from Opal's coat closet. The thorns were tearing the fingers of the gloves. A small voice behind her said, "Are you the lady?" Junie turned. A little girl, 9 years old maybe, curly red hair, freckles, a purple jacket 2 sizes too big, holding a sketchbook against her chest. "Hello," Junie said. "Are you the lady?" "Which lady?" "The lady who bought the big house for $7. 800 actually." "Oh." "It started at 5, and then it got complicated." "Oh. What's your name?" "Marigold." Junie almost dropped the blackberry vine. "Marigold." "Yeah." "Marigold what?" "Marigold Pearson, but everybody calls me Goldie. I live in the yellow house, down at the bottom of the hill. Mom said I can't bother you. But I'm not bothering you. I'm just asking." "You're not bothering me." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Hi, Goldie." "Hi." The little girl stood at the edge of the lawn holding her sketchbook. She was looking at the building, up at the clock tower, at the porch, at the rosettes in the limestone trim. "It's a beautiful house," Goldie said. It was the first time anyone had said that about Marigold Hall in 58 years. Junie set down the blackberry vine. "What's in the sketchbook?" "Drawings." "Can I see?" The little girl came across the grass, sat down on the kitchen step, opened the sketchbook. Junie sat down next to her. The drawings were good, better than good. A 9-year-old should not have been able to draw like this. Pencil, detailed shading. The drawings were of houses, mostly, but not photographs of houses. Imagined houses, with towers that twisted, with windows that opened like flowers, bridges in the air between turrets. One whole page was a building drawn in ink. 4 stories. Italianate. A clock tower with 4 faces. It was Marigold Hall. But not as Marigold Hall looked now, as Marigold Hall must have looked in 1887. With the slates whole and the limestone bright and the windows shining. Junie did not breathe. "How did you draw this?" "From a picture. There's a picture in the library, in the local history room. Mrs. Kettleridge let me look at it." "You drew this from a photograph in the library." "Yeah." "Goldie." "Yeah." "How long have you been drawing buildings?" "Since I was 4. "Why?" The little girl shrugged. "They just look like they want to be drawn." Junie sat on the kitchen step in the watery November sun with a 9-year-old girl she had never seen before. And she thought about an 8-year-old getting on a train to a town she didn't know. She thought about a 12-year-old reading conservation textbooks in the back of a library. She thought about how some girls come into the world already pointing at something and pulling. Goldie, yeah? Do you want to see the inside? Goldie looked at her with eyes as big as quarters. Can I? Tell your mom first. She might say no. She'll say yes. I'll tell her you said yes. Then I'll be back. The little girl ran. She ran down the long driveway with the sketchbook under one arm and the purple jacket flapping behind her. Junie watched until she disappeared into the pines. Goldie was back in 11 minutes. She brought a note from her mother. To whom it may concern, Marigold has permission to visit the house. Please send her home by 5. Best, Marlene Pearson. That was the day Junie gained her smallest helper. Every Saturday from then on, Goldie was there at 9. She had her own sketchbook, her own pencils, her own ideas. The attic was the last room Junie entered. She had been avoiding it. She told herself she was avoiding it because the stairs were broken, because the roof above it was the worst part of the building, because she didn't have time. She was lying to herself. She was avoiding it because attics were where people kept things. And this attic, in this building, was where the people had been gone the longest. Cyril found her at the foot of the attic stairs on the 28th day. She was standing there with a flashlight in her hand, just looking up. You all right, kitten? She nodded. Want me to go first? She shook her head. All right then. He stood beside her. She turned on the flashlight, climbed the stairs. They creaked, but they held. She had reinforced them herself the second week. Cyril followed. The attic was enormous. It ran the full footprint of the building, 60 feet by 80 feet. The roof above sloped to peaks. The eaves were full of cobwebs and old wasp nests. Light came in through 3 round windows in the gable ends. Yellow, dust-mote light. The space was full of furniture, not piled, arranged, as if someone had moved everything up here on purpose and then closed the door. Iron bed frames stacked against one wall. A row of dressing tables, trunks, foot lockers. A school chalkboard on wheels. 3 rocking horses with the paint worn off their saddles. Junie walked between the bed frames. There were so many of them. She counted 16 bed frames. Each one would have held 1 girl, maybe 2 girls if they doubled up. The room she was in had once been a dormitory for 30 children. She kept walking. The flashlight caught something at the far end of the attic. A wall. A wall that was not a wall. It was wallpaper. Wallpaper with marigolds on it. Faded yellow flowers. Stretched across the far gable end of the attic in a way that did not match the room's geometry. Junie walked closer. The wallpaper covered something. She set her palm against it. Behind the paper was wood. Behind the wood was a hollow sound. Cyril came up beside her. There's a door behind that paper. I know. You see it. I felt it. He took out his pocket knife. He cut a slit in the wallpaper. Carefully. Right at the seam where the paper had been pasted. The slit revealed a thin gap, painted over but still visible. He cut further, up the seam, across the top, down the other side, until the wallpaper hung like a door curtain. Behind the wallpaper was a small wooden door, painted the same dusty cream as the rest of the attic walls, with a brass keyhole. Junie reached up to her neck, untied the green ribbon, took out the brass key. She had not used it since the front door. She had been waiting. She had not known she was waiting for this, but she had been waiting. She slid the key into the lock. It turned. The door opened. Cyril did not breathe. Junie did not breathe. Behind the door was a room. A room maybe 10 feet across. Round. The interior of the gable. The walls were papered in yellow marigolds. The same paper. The ceiling was a starburst of bare oak beams. In the center of the room was a small writing desk, made for a child, with an inkwell still in the holder. Against the curved walls were 47 wooden boxes. They were small, cigar box sized, stacked 4 high in some places. Some of them had names painted on the lids in faded ink. Lucy, Mary, Beatrice, Theodora. Junie stopped breathing. She walked to the wall where the boxes were stacked. She knelt down. She read the names. Edna, Frances, Harriet, Theodora. She lifted the box. It was lighter than she expected. She brought it to the writing desk, sat down on the small wooden chair. Cyril stood in the doorway with his flashlight pointed at the ceiling so the light bounced softly off the beams. Junie opened the box. Inside, a bundle of letters tied with green twine, a small notebook with a black cover, a pencil drawing of a horse on a yellowed page torn from a sketch pad, a pressed marigold flower, brittle now, the color of butter. She picked up the notebook. She opened it. Inside the front cover, in handwriting so small she had to squint, "This book belongs to Theodora May Fenimore, aged 9 years, Marigold Hall, 1956. Junie's hands started to shake. She turned the page. October 14th. Today Miss Birdwell taught us how to draft a letter even though we had no one to write to. I wrote to my mother anyway. I will not send it, but I will keep it. Mary says her mother sends her a chocolate every Christmas. I do not know if my mother knows it is almost Christmas. I do not know if she remembers I am 8 years old." Junie put her hand over her mouth. She turned the page. November 2nd. Mary said her aunt is going to come for her. I said, "That's lovely." I went to the chapel after. I sat in the back row. Miss Adelaide came in and sat next to me. She did not say anything. She just sat next to me until I could breathe again. Junie turned more pages. December. The matron says I am to take piano lessons. She says I have something the music room wants. I do not know what she means. I sat at the piano today and I played the C key with one finger. It was the loudest sound I have ever heard in my life. Junie made a small noise. Cyril said nothing. She turned more pages. She turned past 1957, past 1958, past 1959. The handwriting grew taller. The entries grew longer. The voice of a girl growing up. In 1962, Teddy was 15. Today a woman came. She wore a green coat. She asked the matron if she could see me. The matron said no. I watched from the upstairs window. The woman stood on the porch for a long time. I think she was crying. The matron said she was not my mother. The matron said my mother was not coming. The matron has been saying that since I was 8. But today the matron looked at me funny when she said it, like she was not sure anymore, like she had been told something. Junie turned the page. I asked Miss Adelaide who the woman was. Miss Adelaide said she did not know, but Miss Adelaide could not look at me when she said it. Junie turned more pages. She got to a page in 1964. Teddy was 17, about to age out. The matron called me into the office today. She gave me a letter. The letter was from Sandra Fenimore, Boston, Massachusetts. The letter was dated 1955. It had never been opened. The matron said she had found it in the back of a drawer when she was cleaning out the office. The matron said she was very sorry. Junie's heart was a hammer. I sat in the chapel and I opened the letter. The letter was from my mother. My mother said she was sorry. My mother said she had not wanted to send me here. My mother said her father had made her do it. Because I had no father. Because I had been born of a man my mother had loved who was not the kind of man my mother's father would let her marry. My mother said she had tried to come for me when she was 21, and the matron had told her I had been adopted by a family in Ohio. My mother said she had believed it. My mother said she had a daughter now, a little girl named Margaret. Margaret was 3 years old. Junie stopped. Margaret. That was her own mother's name. Margaret Fenimore, born 1962. The architectural conservation books in the box on the dresser. She was reading the letter that had told her grandmother she had a half-sister. She kept reading. My mother said she had been told I was happy. My mother said she would understand if I did not write back. My mother gave me an address in Boston. I sat in the chapel for a long time. I did not write back. I do not know if I will ever write back. I do not know if I have a mother. I have had no mother for 9 years. I have had Miss Adelaide. I have had Mary. I have had Bernice. I have had this place. I do not know if I have a mother. Junie closed the notebook. She closed her eyes. She sat on the small wooden chair in the small round room at the top of Marigold Hall, and she understood something she had not understood before. Her grandmother had been sent here, not abandoned, sent. By a mother who had loved her, by a mother who had been forced to, by a mother who had tried to come back for her and been turned away by a matron who lied. For 60 years, her grandmother had not known whether her mother had loved her, until she was 17 and a different matron had cleaned out a drawer. And then her grandmother had read the truth and not been able to do anything with it. Because by then her mother had a daughter named Margaret, a daughter who had grown up to have a daughter named Junie. Junie stood up. She stood up so fast the chair fell over. Cyril caught her by the elbow. She did not say anything to him. She put the notebook back in the box. She closed the box. She picked up the box and the bundle of letters with the green twine and the pressed marigold flower. She carried them down 2 flights of stairs. She walked into the foyer and set the box on the desk where the leather register sat. And she stood there with her hands flat on the wood for a long time, until Opal arrived for the day with sandwiches, until Sage came in from the truck, until Goldie came skipping up the porch steps in her purple coat, until Junie raised her head and said, to no one in particular, to everyone in the foyer, my grandmother had a sister. The mayor moved on day 45. Junie was in the music room. Sage and Cyril were on the roof of the chapel patching slates. Opal was in the parlor sorting through a box of programs from the 1923 spring recital. Goldie was on the porch drawing the clock tower. A black sedan pulled up the driveway. The man who got out was wearing a charcoal suit, a lawyer's briefcase. He came up the porch steps and rang the bell with a confidence Junie did not feel. She opened the door. Miss Fenimore? Yes. I am attorney Jonas Lindquist. I represent the town of Cherrybrook. I have a notice of administrative action for you. He held out an envelope. Junie did not take it. What kind of action? You will need to review the documents. What kind of action? He sighed, as if she were being difficult. The town has determined that this property poses a significant public safety risk. Under Municipal Ordinance 411-12, the town is requiring you to bring the structure into full code compliance within 120 days. Failure to do so will result in the property being condemned. Demolition will be at the property owner's expense. Junie stared at him. 120 days. That is correct. To bring an 18,000 square foot historic structure into full code compliance. That is correct, ma'am. That is impossible. That is the town's determination. This is, she stopped. This is the mayor. This is the town. This is Barnaby Prescott. The attorney did not respond. He set the envelope on the porch railing because Junie would not take it. He nodded once, then walked back to his car. The car drove away. Junie stood on the porch with the envelope sitting on the railing in front of her. Sage came down off the chapel roof. Cyril came down behind him. Opal came out of the parlor with a 1923 program in her hand. Goldie set down her pencil. They all stood on the porch and looked at Junie and waited. Junie picked up the envelope, opened it, read it again. He wants the building, Junie said. He wants the land, Cyril said. He wants the land. I bet you anything, Sage said. He had a resort plan drawn up for that hillside before you ever heard of this place. 120 days. Junie, I don't have the money to bring this place into full code in 120 days. I don't have the money. I have library paychecks. I have. Junie, I have a wet vacuum and a borrowed ladder and Junie. She stopped. She looked at Cyril. What? You have us. She did not cry. She wanted to. She just nodded and went back inside. They worked harder. October had given them mild weather. November came in cold and gray. The wind whipped down the driveway from Oak Ridge in gusts that took the leaves off the maples in 2 days. Junie did not stop. She did not sleep more than 5 hours a night. She woke at 4. She made coffee in the kitchen on a hot plate Opal had brought from the library break room. She climbed scaffolding in the dark. She held lanterns. She read books. By the end of November, they had patched 22 slate sections on the roof. They had stabilized the foundation on the south wall. They had rewired the parlor and the music room and the foyer. They had restored 7 windows. They had hung 2 new doors. They had painted the chapel ceiling. It was not enough. In the dark at the back of her head, Junie was counting days, counting violations, counting the things she could not finish in time. On the 2nd of December, the storm came. It was forecast as snow. It turned out to be sleet. The sleet came down for 9 hours. Junie was on the porch at noon when she saw the leak. Water running down the wall above the foyer door. From outside, pouring. Where 2 slates had come loose in the wind during the morning hours. She didn't think. She put on a coat, climbed the porch railing, hauled herself up onto the lower roof, made her way to the ladder, climbed. She was on the slate roof, in the sleet, in her work boots, carrying a roll of roofing membrane and a tube of mastic. She got to the loose slates, lifted them, tucked the membrane under, pressed the mastic, replaced the slates. She stood up. The slate under her left boot slid. She put out her hand. She caught the ridge, but her body went sideways, and she came down on her right hand. And then she was on her back on the slate with her right hand bent the wrong way, and a sound coming out of her mouth that she did not recognize. She slid 8 feet. She caught a snow guard. The snow guard held. Sage came up the ladder so fast Cyril could not have stopped him if he tried. He got to her. He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. He saw the gray in her face. He picked her up. He carried her down the ladder. She did not remember the ride to the hospital. She remembered Cyril's hands shaking on the steering wheel. She remembered Opal crying. She remembered Goldie pressing her face into Junie's coat and saying, "Please, please, please, please," over and over. She remembered Sage in the front seat looking back at her with a face she had not seen on his face before. The hospital was Cherrybrook General. 20 beds, 3 doctors. They set her wrist. They wrapped her ankle. She had also twisted her ankle. Badly. She had not noticed because her wrist hurt more. They kept her 3 days. On the 2nd day, her Uncle Harlan came. He did not bring flowers. He stood at the foot of her bed with his arms crossed. I heard. Yes. You have to stop this. No. You are going to kill yourself. That's my business. It is not your business. You are 20 years old and you are going to kill yourself in that building, and they are going to say I let you do it. Sell to the mayor. He will pay you $40,000. You take it. You move somewhere warm. You go to school. You stop. No. Junie. No. He stared at her for a long time. Then he turned and walked out. He did not come back. She left the hospital on Saturday. Sage drove. Cyril sat next to her in the back. Opal sat next to him. The driveway up to Marigold Hall was covered in fresh snow. 3 inches. The pines were heavy. The roof of the building was white and the windows glowed gold. Junie thought she was dreaming. Sage parked in front of the porch steps. There was a truck she did not recognize parked at the far side of the driveway. There was also another truck, and a sedan, and another sedan, and she counted later. 11 vehicles. Sage got out and came around. He opened her door. He took her under one arm and Cyril took her under the other. They helped her up the porch steps. She had her right hand in a cast, her right ankle in a boot. She could not work for 6 weeks. She did not know what she was going to do. She did not know. She opened the front door. The foyer was full of people. She stood in the doorway with the cold wind coming in behind her, and she counted. A woman in her 50s on a stepladder fixing a crack in the foyer plaster. Two women in their 70s on the staircase patching a tread. A woman about Opal's age polishing the brass hooks above the foyer desk. A woman maybe 70 carrying a basket of cleaning rags. A man in his 60s on a stool replacing a fuse in the foyer chandelier. Three women in the parlor running a vacuum cleaner across the carpet. A woman in the music room playing the middle C of the Bosendorfer. More in the chapel. Junie could hear them. Hammers. Voices. In the foyer. 23 people total. She knew 6 of them. The rest she had never seen in her life. Opal stepped forward. From behind her, she had a hand on Junie's elbow. Junie. Opal, what is? Listen to me. Sit down first. She helped Junie to the foyer desk, to the chair behind it. She helped her into the chair. The woman who had been patching the foyer plaster came down off the ladder. She wiped her hands on a rag. She was about 63, white hair in a bun, a face that had been weeping for some time before Junie arrived. She came to the foyer desk, took Junie's good hand, held it, looked at her. My name is Beverly, Beverly McAdoo. I lived in this house from 1965 to 1968. I was the last class of girls. Junie could not speak. Your grandmother, Theodora. She was 18 when I was 11. She was the girl in charge of our reading hour. She used to read us Black Beauty on Sunday evenings. She used to do all the voices. Beverly's mouth trembled. I came when I read the paper. I had not been back here in 58 years. I came when I read the paper, and then I called the others. The others? Beverly nodded. She turned. She gestured at the room. The Marigold Girls. Junie's head swam. Beverly squeezed her hand. There were 604 of us, from 1887 to 1968. Most are gone now. Some 40 are still living. 22 of us came when we heard. There are more on the way. On the way. From California, from Arizona, from Florida, from Maine. There are more on the way. Junie put her good hand over her mouth. The woman on the staircase looked over her shoulder at her. The two women in the parlor stopped vacuuming. The man at the chandelier set down his fuse. The woman at the Bosendorfer stopped playing. All 23 people in the foyer turned to look at the 20-year-old girl in the chair behind the desk. Beverly McAdoo lifted her chin. She spoke loudly enough for all of them to hear. This was our house. We had nothing else. And the women who ran it loved us. And Theodora loved us. And your mother lived to be born because her sister survived this place. And now you are here. And we are here. And we are not going to let some mayor in a Navy suit take this from you. Junie sat behind the desk with the leather register in front of her, and a cast on her right hand and a wrap on her ankle, and tears running down her face that she could not stop. She looked at Cyril. Cyril looked at her. He nodded once. She looked at Beverly McAdoo. She tried to speak. She could not. But Beverly seemed to understand. She tightened her grip on Junie's hand. All right then, child, she said. Where do we start? The Marigold Girls did not leave. Not for 6 weeks. They came in shifts. Beverly McAdoo organized them like a general organizes a campaign. She had a clipboard. She had a phone list. She had assigned each woman to a room, a task a day. The women who lived close came every morning. The women who lived far came on weekends. The women who could no longer climb ladders sat in the parlor and sorted boxes. The women who could climb ladders climbed them. There was a 91-year-old named Vivian who sat in a folding chair in the chapel and directed 3 younger women on where each chair should go. Junie sat at the foyer desk most days. Her wrist was in a cast. She could not work with her right hand. So she worked with her left. She held a pencil between her thumb and her index finger. She drew, she sketched, she drafted, she made plans. She told people where things needed to go. She had learned to read a room from her mother's books and from 12 years of nights in the library and from her own bones. She was the youngest person in the building by 25 years, and she ran it. Sage was beside her most days. He had taken a leave of absence from school. She had told him not to. He had said, "Too late, I already filed the paperwork." He sat at the foyer desk with her in the afternoons. They went over the punch list. He read off the violations from the town's notice. She crossed out the ones they had completed. He crossed out the ones she missed because her left hand was tired and her right hand throbbed. They worked. Day 45 of the 120, day 58, day 70. By day 80, the music room was finished. The Bosendorfer had been tuned by a man from Burlington who had heard about the project from Sage's professor at the University of Vermont. He drove down. He spent 2 days inside the piano. When he was done, all 88 keys worked. On the night he finished, Junie sat at the piano and played middle C, then C and E and G. A chord. She had taught herself to play in the back of the library on a keyboard Opal had bought at a yard sale and kept in the storage closet. She was not good. She had never played for anyone. She had never played in a room with this much marble and this much plaster and this much ceiling. The chord went up the 4 floors. It came down again. It hung in the foyer like a held breath. A woman in the parlor said, "Oh!" Junie did not turn around. She closed the fallboard. She walked back to her desk. Beverly was at the desk with a thermos of soup. "Eat." "I'm not hungry." "Eat." Junie ate. By day 91, the chapel ceiling was repainted. A retired interior painter who used to do murals for a hotel in Boston had come up from Hartford. She had stayed in Beverly's guest room for 9 days. She had painted the ceiling on her back on scaffolding. She had repainted the trim around the stained glass window above the altar. She had refused to take any money. Her name was Lorraine. She told Junie on her last evening, "I came here in 1953. I was 6. I left in 1960. I was 13 and I thought I knew everything. I never looked back at this place. I never said the word. I have a husband and 3 children and 7 grandchildren, and not one of them knows where I spent the first 13 years of my life. I have 8 more years of working hands, and I am giving you 9 of them." Junie did not know what to say to that. She held Lorraine's hand at the door. Lorraine smiled. "Send me a postcard when the chapel opens." By day 103, the foundation was certified. A structural engineer had come from Burlington with a kit of testing equipment. Sage had called him. The engineer was a friend of Sage's professor. He had walked the perimeter, the basement, the bearing walls. He had tested the limestone. He had tested the brick. He had taken photographs and core samples. He had stood in the foyer at the end of the second day, spoken to Junie like she was a colleague. Whoever stabilized this south wall did textbook work. The mortar joints have been packed properly. The grout injections are even. The new lintel is steel. This building will stand for another 150 years. Junie did not tell him that whoever stabilized this south wall was a one-handed 20-year-old girl with a borrowed mortar gun and her mother's textbooks. She just thanked him. He filed his certification with the town. The mayor read it on his porch on a Sunday morning. He read it twice. He set it down, picked up the phone, called his lawyer. "What other angles do we have?" "Sir, we're running out." "There has to be something." "Sir, the building inspector says she is on track. The historic district is going to designate her property next month. The state preservation officer drove out here last Tuesday." "I do not care." "Sir, find me something." His lawyer was quiet. "Sir," the lawyer said, "yes, you should let it go." The mayor did not let it go. But on day 117 of the 120, a letter arrived at Marigold Hall. It came addressed to Junie Mae Fenimore, owner, Marigold Hall, 4 Oak Ridge Road, Cherrybrook, Vermont. The return address said Vera Pearson, Pacific Grove, California. Junie did not know anyone in California. She opened the envelope on the porch. A single sheet of paper, handwriting in blue ink, an old woman's handwriting. Round, careful. My dear Junie, your face was on the front page of the Sacramento newspaper. My granddaughter saw it. She thought it might be a coincidence. I do not believe in coincidences. My name is Vera. I was born Vera Mae Fenimore in Boston in 1942. My mother was Sandra Fenimore. My sister was Theodora Mae Fenimore. My mother did not tell me about my sister until she was dying in 1981. I have spent the last 45 years looking for her. Most of those years, I did not know where to look. Your grandmother and I shared a mother. I do not know if we share anything else. I do not know if she ever knew that I was looking for her. I do not know if she would have wanted me to find her. But I read in the paper that she raised you. And I read that she left you a wooden box with $700 and a brass key. And I read that the key opened a door that led to a small room at the top of a building called Marigold Hall. I have a key like that one. My mother left it to me when she died in 1981. She told me it had belonged to her once. She told me she did not know what it opened. She did know. She was just ashamed to say. Junie, I am 84 years old. I am still in good health. I am writing to tell you that I am coming. I will be there next Tuesday. Your great-aunt Vera Junie sat down on the porch. She did not sit down. She fell down. Onto the porch step, the letter in her good hand. She read it 3 times. Then she sat on the porch for an hour and could not move. Sage found her there. Junie, she held up the letter. He read it twice. He looked at her face. He sat down next to her. He put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned against him for the first time. She did not cry. She did not cry because she had used all her tears in the attic and in the hospital and at the music room piano, and there were none left. She just sat, with Sage's arm around her, and the late winter sun warming the porch boards, and the letter saying I am coming in her good hand. Vera Pearson arrived on Tuesday at 3 in the afternoon. She came in a rented blue Buick. The Buick crawled up the long driveway. Junie was standing on the porch in her best coat, the coat Teddy had bought her for her high school graduation, the coat she had not worn since. Sage stood beside her. Cyril stood beside Sage. Opal stood beside Cyril. Goldie stood in front of Goldie's mother. Goldie's mother stood at the bottom of the porch steps. The Buick stopped. The door opened. A small woman got out. She was 84 years old. She had silver hair cut to her chin. She had a face that looked like Junie's mother, like Junie, like Teddy. She had Teddy's mouth. Junie saw it before she saw the rest of her. She had Teddy's mouth. Vera looked up at the porch. She looked at Junie. Vera put her hand to her mouth. She walked around the front of the Buick, stopped at the foot of the porch steps. She took her hand away from her mouth. You have my mother's eyes. You have my grandmother's mouth. Vera made a small sound. She climbed the steps. She climbed them one at a time, slowly, the way a woman of 84 climbs steps. She got to the top. She stood in front of Junie. She lifted her right hand. She set it against Junie's cheek. Her palm was thin. The skin was soft. My God, Vera said. She raised you. She raised me. What did she call you? Kitten. Vera closed her eyes. A tear came out from under one closed eyelid. She called me Kitten when I was small. In a letter she wrote to me when I was 3. The letter she never sent. The letter my mother kept in a drawer for 40 years. The letter I have read 400 times. Junie did not have any words. Sage stepped forward. He took Vera's coat. He led her into the foyer. Goldie ran up the porch steps and grabbed Junie's hand. Goldie was 9 years old. She did not know yet that Vera was her great-grandmother. Junie was about to figure it out. She did not figure it out yet. She would figure it out at the kitchen table with the photo album Vera had brought from California, where Goldie's grandmother appeared on page 7, where Goldie's mother appeared on page 9, where Goldie herself appeared on page 16, where the family tree on the inside cover ran from Sandra Fenimore down to Vera, down to Vera's daughter Marlene, down to Marlene Pearson, Junie's neighbor down to Marigold Pearson, the little girl currently pressing her face into Junie's coat sleeve and saying, "Who is that lady?" Junie would figure it out at the kitchen table. Right now, she just walked her great aunt into the foyer of Marigold Hall and let her see the place where her sister had lived. Vera stood in the foyer. She looked at the marble. She looked at the staircase. She looked at the desk with the leather register. She walked to the desk. She set her hand on the register. She opened it. Junie watched her great aunt turn pages until she got to 1955. Vera read the names. She stopped at Theodora May Fenimore. She set her finger on the name. She stood there for a long time. Then she lifted her finger, touched it to her lips, pressed her lips to the page. The day of the inspection came, day 120, the deadline. Vera had been in Cherry Brook for 3 days by then. She was staying in the small guest cottage at the back of the property. The cottage Cyril and 3 Marigold girls had spent 2 weeks refurbishing without Junie knowing. They had presented it to her on day 114 as a place where Vera could stay. Vera had wept in the cottage doorway. She had stayed. She had come up to the main house every morning at 7, with coffee, with a pad of paper, with ideas. She had been a kindergarten teacher for 37 years in California. She had retired with 3,000 letters from former students. She knew how to organize people. She set up a volunteer schedule. She did the dishes. She wrote thank you cards to the women who had come from out of state. She told Junie everything she knew about her grandmother's life from 1942 to 1981. Junie told Vera everything she remembered about her grandmother's life from 2006 to 2026. They filled in 60 years between them. On the morning of day 120, Junie stood on the porch in clean clothes. Her cast had come off 2 weeks earlier. Her ankle was still wrapped, but she could walk on it. She was waiting for the town inspector. He came at 10, driving the same white truck as the first time. He climbed the porch steps. He did not look young anymore. He looked older, tireder. He had been at the house once a week for the last 14 weeks. He had filled out compliance forms. He had submitted them to the mayor. He had been called back into the mayor's office 5 times. He had a clipboard in his hand, a folder, a small black box like the kind that holds a fancy pen. Junie. Hi, Brendan. She knew his name now. I am here for the final inspection. I know. You ready? I'm ready. They walked through the building together. Sage came with him. Cyril came with him. Beverly came with him. Vera stayed in the parlor with Opal because Vera had asked to be allowed to sit in the parlor while it was happening. Brendan walked. He looked at the foundation. He looked at the roof. He looked at the electrical. He looked at the plumbing. He looked at the windows, the doors, the fire egress paths, the staircase, the chapel, the dormitories, the kitchen. He looked at the small round attic room. He stood in the small round attic room with his clipboard at his side. He looked at the 47 boxes against the curved wall. He looked at the yellow marigold wallpaper. He looked at the little wooden chair. He did not check anything off on the clipboard. He just looked. He came down the stairs in front of Junie. He walked to the parlor. He stopped in the parlor doorway, looked at Vera in the green wingback chair, looked at Opal beside her, looked at the room, the fresh wallpaper, the polished floor, the grand piano visible through the music room doorway. He turned to Junie. He held out the clipboard. It passes. Junie looked at the clipboard. She did not read it. It passes, he said again. Brendan, every line item, foundation, roof, egress, electrical, plumbing, fire suppression, historic preservation overlay, A DA compliance for the porch and main floor, sprinkler retrofit, insurance certified, every line item. He took the small black box out of his pocket. He set it on the clipboard. He opened the box. Inside was a fountain pen, old, brass, with a marigold engraved on the cap. My grandmother lived here from 1934 to 1942. Her name was Estelle Brock. She was the one who taught Miss Adelaide how to bake bread. She gave me this pen when I was 11. She told me to give it to somebody who deserved it. Junie's good hand was over her mouth. I have been carrying this pen in my pocket for 32 years. I have been waiting to give it to somebody. He held out the pen. Sign for me, Miss Fenimore. She took the pen. She signed. He took the clipboard back. He nodded once. Tell the mayor for me, she said. Tell him what? Tell him. She stopped. She thought about it. Tell him nothing. Tell him it passed. Brendan smiled, for the first time that Junie could remember. Yes, ma'am. The story went to the Burlington paper that weekend. The headline read, 20-year-old restores lost Vermont orphanage. Hundreds lived there. Town forgot. The Burlington paper ran the story on a Sunday. By Monday, the Boston Globe had picked it up. By Tuesday, an editor at a national magazine had emailed Junie at the library address Opal had set up for the project. By Wednesday, a producer at public television had called. Junie did not understand what was happening. She handled the calls the way she handled everything, one at a time. She gave a magazine writer a tour of the building. The writer was a woman in her 60s named Marion Diamond, who had a husband who restored boats in Maine. Marion stayed in Cherrybrook for 4 days. She interviewed Junie. She interviewed Vera. She interviewed Beverly McAdoo. She interviewed Cyril. She interviewed Lorraine the painter. She interviewed 7 Marigold girls who came up from out of state to be interviewed. The article ran in the May issue, 23 pages, the cover. The cover was a photograph Marion Diamond had taken on her last morning. Junie sitting on the porch steps with Vera on her left and Goldie on her right. 3 generations, the same mouth, the same eyes. The clock tower behind them with its hands moving for the first time in 58 years. The headline read, $800 in 81 years. The House That Waited. The documentary aired in July. By the time it aired, 200,000 people had visited Marigold Hall. They came from 41 states and 7 countries. They walked the grounds. They sat in the chapel. They stood in the small, round attic room. The county assessor came in August. He spent 2 days inspecting the property. He filed his report on a Friday afternoon. Junie opened the envelope at the kitchen table. Vera was beside her. Opal was beside Vera. Goldie was on Junie's lap. She read the assessment. She read it twice. She set the paper down on the table. She looked at Vera. 3.8 million, she said. Vera blinked. For the building, plus historic landmark status, plus the surrounding 5 acres designated as a permanent conservation easement, plus. She picked up the paper, read the last line, plus a state historic preservation grant, $200,000 for ongoing restoration. Vera reached across the table. She took Junie's hand. Kitten, she said. That was the only word. It was enough. The mayor lost the next election. He did not run. He had read the magazine article. He had watched the documentary. He had stood in front of his bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in late July and recognized that the man in the mirror could not run for office in Cherrybrook again. He came to Marigold Hall the 2nd Saturday in September. It was the day of the opening, the dedication. The town had been invited. 240 Cherrybrook residents came. They sat in folding chairs on the lawn. They had punch and cookies. The Bosendorfer was in the music room with its windows open, and a Marigold girl named Beatrice was playing Chopin, and the music came across the lawn in waves. The mayor came up the driveway in a Subaru, not the Buick. He parked at the bottom of the hill. He walked up. He had a sport coat, no tie, no suit. He had his hands in his pockets. He found Junie near the porch. She was directing the placement of a folding table where Beverly was about to set out the dedication programs. He came up beside her. He did not say, "Excuse me." He said, "I am sorry." Junie turned. She had not seen him since the auction. She had been waiting for the right thing to feel about him. She had not figured it out. She did not know yet. She just looked at him. "I have nothing to offer you. I am here because I owe you this in person." "All right." "I read the article. I read the part about your grandmother. I read about your great aunt. I read about Brendan's grandmother. I read about Cyril's mother. I read about Lorraine. I read about Beverly. I read everyone." "All right." "I tried to take this building from a 20-year-old girl." "You did." "I tried to take it from her because I thought she did not understand what she had." "You did." "She understood." "I did." He nodded once. "I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not have the standing to ask for that." Junie thought. She thought about her grandmother in the chapel in 1962, watching a woman in a green coat get sent away on the porch. She thought about the things people do because they are scared, about the things people do because they want something, about the difference. She thought about her Uncle Harlan, who had not come and would not come. She thought about her mother, who had died too soon to know any of this. She thought about Teddy, who had carried a secret for 60 years and had still found a way to tell her granddaughter where to go. "You can sit in the back," she said. "What?" "During the ceremony. You can sit in the back." The mayor opened his mouth. He closed it. He nodded. He went to the back of the folding chairs and he sat down in the very last row. Junie did not look at him again. She had things to do. The ceremony began at 3. Vera spoke first. She stood on the porch in a navy dress with a brooch on her collar. She held a small piece of paper, but she did not look at it. She said, "My mother had 2 daughters. She raised one. She lost the other. She lived with the loss every day for the rest of her life. When she was dying in 1981, she made me promise to find my sister. I promised. I did not find her in time." Vera looked out at the lawn. She found Junie in the front row. "But my sister had a granddaughter, and the granddaughter found us all." She lifted her piece of paper. "This building was built in 1887 by 4 women. Their names were Adelaide Whitcomb, Hester Plimpton, Marigold Hodge, and Beulah Trenchard. They were unmarried. They were not wealthy. They believed that girls who had nowhere to go should have somewhere to go. They ran this place for 35 years. When they died, the matrons who came after them kept running it. For another 46 years, 604 girls came through these doors." Vera paused. 604 girls. She looked at the chairs on the lawn. "Will all the Marigold girls in attendance please stand?" Junie had not known this was coming. Across the lawn, in the folding chairs, 22 women stood. They were old. They had silver hair and white hair and the kind of careful posture that women of a certain age have. They wore their best dresses. Some of them wore corsages. They had come from 12 states. They stood on the lawn at Marigold Hall, and the audience stood up too. All 240 of them. They stood and they clapped for the women who had once been the children in this building, whom the town had forgotten about, whom the town had not asked about, whom the town had not even known to look for. They clapped for a long time. Junie looked at the back row. The mayor was on his feet, his hands above his head, his face wet. She nodded at him once. She did not smile, but she nodded. He nodded back. Goldie spoke after that. This had not been planned either. She had asked Vera that morning if she could say something. Vera had said, "Of course, darling." Vera had thought it would be a sentence or two. Vera had not asked what. Goldie walked up the porch steps with her sketchbook. She stood at the microphone Beverly had set up. She was 9 years old. She wore a purple dress. She held up her sketchbook. "This is a picture I drew of the house. before it got fixed. I drew it the first time I came here. The lady let me come in. I was scared, but I came in because I really wanted to. The lawn was silent. And now my great-grandma is here, and my cousin Junie is here, and my mom is here, and we are all in the same place at the same time. And I have a picture of all of us. I drew it last week, and I want to give it to Junie now. Goldie set the sketchbook on the podium. She tore a page out of it. She walked down the porch steps. She walked across the lawn. She came to the front row. She handed the paper to Junie. Junie unfolded it. It was a drawing of 4 women, a 9-year-old girl, a 20-year-old young woman with her wrist in a cast, a 30-something-year-old woman with curly red hair, an 84-year-old woman with silver hair, all 4 of them with the same mouth, in pencil by a 9-year-old. Below the drawing, in careful letters, Goldie had written my family. By Marigold Pearson, age 9. Junie held the drawing in her good hand. The lawn waited. She set the drawing on her knees. She stood up. She walked up the porch steps. She turned to face the lawn. She had not prepared anything. She had thought Vera was going to say the only thing that needed saying. She had thought she would not have to speak. She did not have notes. She did not have a piece of paper. She just looked at the lawn full of people. She looked at Beverly McAdoo in the front row. She looked at Cyril Hawthorne in the second row. She looked at Opal Kettleridge sitting next to her sister, who had come up from New Hampshire for the day. She looked at Lorraine the painter, who had driven up from Hartford. She looked at Brendan, the building inspector, in a clean shirt with his wife beside him. She looked at Sage, who was standing at the back of the lawn so he could keep an eye on the chairs for the older guests. She looked at Vera in the navy dress. She looked at Goldie in the purple dress. She looked at her hands. She looked up. I bought this building for $800. People laughed, quietly, politely. I bought it for $800 because I lost the bid at 5 and I had to keep going. And I would have lost again at 700. Except Mrs. Kettleridge in the second to last row raised a paddle she was not supposed to have, and she saved me at 8. The lawn was quiet now. My grandmother left me a key. The key fit a door I had never seen. The door led to a room I did not know existed, and the room was full of letters from girls I had never met. Who knew my grandmother? Who loved her? Who she loved back? Junie looked at Beverly. For 60 years, my grandmother carried this place, by herself. She did not tell anyone, not even me. She thought it was a secret she had to keep, because she thought it was a thing to be ashamed of, to have lived in a place like this. Junie shook her head. It is not a thing to be ashamed of. She looked at the lawn. The women who built this place loved the girls who lived here. The girls who lived here loved each other. They grew up. They left. They never spoke of it because they thought the world would judge them. The world did judge them. The world judged 604 little girls for being little girls without mothers in the room. She stopped. She took a breath. The world was wrong. She let that sit. I am not going to live here alone. This building is too big for one person. It was always too big for one person. It was built for many people, so it is going to hold many people. She gestured at the building behind her. Marigold Hall is going to be a school, starting in the fall, for girls ages 8 to 18 who need a place. Tuition will be free, funded by the State Preservation Grant, the State Historic Commission, and a fund that the Marigold girls have started in memory of the women who built this place. The lawn made a sound, like 100 people inhaling at once. The first class will be 12 girls. We have already chosen them. They will come in September. They will study what they want to study. They will live here with house parents who are former Marigold girls. They will learn that they do not have to be ashamed of where they come from, of who their mothers are or are not. They will be loved by women who know what it is to need to be loved. Junie stopped. She had to. She breathed. She looked at Goldie. And on Saturdays, we are going to teach art free For any girl in Vermont who wants to draw, or paint, or build, Goldie Pearson is going to be in the first class. Goldie looked up at her with eyes the size of dinner plates. Junie looked back at the lawn. She looked at the back row, where her Uncle Harlan stood. She had not seen him arrive. She did not know how long he had been there. He was alone, in a brown jacket, his hat in his hands. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. He did not nod. He did not speak. He did not stay. He turned. He walked down the driveway. He got in his car. He drove away. Junie did not flinch. She turned back to the lawn. She looked at Vera. She looked at Beverly. She looked at Cyril. She looked at Opal. I had nothing 11 months ago. Less than nothing. I had an uncle who threw me out. I had a key I did not understand. I had $700. She lifted Goldie's drawing. I have everything now. The lawn stood up. They stood up before she finished. They stood up and they clapped. They clapped for a long time. The clapping went down the long drive and out onto Oak Ridge Road and back through the pines that had hidden Marigold Hall for 58 years. Junie stood on the porch with the drawing in her good hand. She looked at the audience. She looked at the open doors of the building behind her. She looked at the brass nameplate above the desk, which Cyril had restored, which now read in clean letters. Marigold Hall, established 1887, for girls who belong. That night, after the last of the Marigold girls had gone home, after Goldie's mother had carried Goldie up the hill asleep with paint on her face, after Cyril and Sage had stacked the folding chairs, after Opal had washed the punch bowls, after Vera had retired to the cottage at the back of the property, Junie sat on the porch steps alone. The clock tower struck 8. For the first time since 1968, the chimes hung in the cool September air. She held Goldie's drawing on her lap. 4 women, 1 porch, 1 family found. Sage came out of the building behind her. He had been turning off lights. He sat down on the step next to her. He did not touch her. He just sat next to her. Junie, yes, it's a beautiful house. I know. I know you know. She looked at him. He looked at her. He smiled. She smiled back. For the first time in 11 months, she smiled with her whole face. She set her head against his shoulder. He did not move. The two of them sat on the porch of Marigold Hall in the September dark. The crickets sang in the overgrown lawn that would be a garden again by next spring. The clock tower struck the quarter hour. Somewhere in the dark, down at the bottom of the long driveway, a 9-year-old girl was asleep in her bed. Somewhere in the dark in the cottage at the back of the property, an 84-year-old woman was asleep in a bed she had never expected to sleep in. Somewhere in the dark above all of it, in a small round attic room papered in marigolds, 47 wooden boxes sat on the floor in rows. Each box held the letters of a girl who had once lived in this building. Each girl had once been small. Each girl had once been afraid. Each girl had once been told by a town like this one that she was a secret to be kept. Each girl had been wrong. Junie Fenimore, 20 years old, granddaughter of one of those girls, great niece of another, daughter of the daughter who never knew. Sat on the porch of the house her grandmother had lived in for 10 years and had not been able to tell her about. She set her hand on the porch boards. The wood was warm, the way old wood gets warm when it has been loved for a long time, and then loved again.